The member for Lansdale.
Madam Speaker, it's an honour and a privilege to be your warm-up act, but more of you later. Members, I counsel you that it is a convention valedictory speeches are heard without interjection. This may seem rich coming from me, but I make the remark for the sole benefit of the harrowing, or is it harried, leader of the Liberal Party. Having heard my colleagues who have spoken already, I'm overawed. All very different, all very moving, and I wish all of my colleagues who are retiring well. So how do I approach summing up 23 years of being the member for Girrawheen and subsequently as the member for Lansdale in just 30 minutes? It was recently sheeted home to me how long that was when a constituent came to my office to get an affidavit witnessed. She told me I had given her a book prize at North Balga Primary School in Year 7. She'd finished high school, got married, had kids and was now divorcing. I told her that she'd packed a lot more into those years than I had. But reflecting on what I might say today, I realised I did manage to get a bit done. Of late, all sorts of memories have been flooding back. I apologise to colleagues who have had to endure my endless anecdotes over afternoon tea, many of which have not made the cut. I've had the privilege to undertake many roles in government and in opposition. In that time, there have been 5 premiers and 13 changes in leaders of opposition. Now, that 13 does count Colin Barnett a couple of times. But let me start at the beginning. I was elected in 2001 as part of the victorious Gallop Labor government. And I'm delighted that Parliament has changed since that time. It's now much more diverse, with 50% women in this chamber, and the members for Pilbara, Riverton and Jandakot of Indian heritage joining us, and in the Legislative Council, the Honourable Ayor Chuot, MLC, and the Honourable Pierre Yang from Cal backgrounds, and of course my good friend Carol Martin, the first Aboriginal woman to be elected to this place. Members, my predecessor in Girrawheen was the avuncular Ted Cunningham. He cast a long shadow, and so I was apprehensive. And these concerns were not assuaged, knowing that I would be operating in the patch of the KGB. In this case, KGB stood for the suburbs of Kandoola, Girrawheen and Balga, and referred to a so-called youth gang. I was further alarmed when police advised on security for my office that we should install bulletproof glass. At $75,000, big money in those days, I declined due to the cost, especially when I learned that the recommendation was made due to my previous occupation of chasing organised criminals rather than any local concerns. Ironically, not long after, an armed robbery of a security van saw bullets flying nearby, one glancing off my office door. I was in Parliament that day, so my staff were, as usual, the only ones in imminent harm. Despite this, I found the good people of the multicultural Girrawheen electorate, as Ted would call them, fantastic, straight-talking, hard-working, economically disadvantaged, many of faith and from refugee and migrant backgrounds like Somalia, South Sudan, Vietnam, the Congo, Burma, Ethiopia, Macedonia and Italy, to name a few. I was delighted to work, celebrate important days and help them make their way, a rare privilege. Not long after the attack on the World Trade Centre, I noticed a tangible rise in abuse of Muslim constituents. This presented a real challenge of social cohesion. At this time, an Alston cartoon appeared in the West Australian showing 2 panels. The first, where they think Osama bin Laden is, with him hiding in the mountains in Afghanistan, and the other, where he actually is, with the elusive terrorist in Coles Girraween. With the zeal of a new member, I penned a pious and self-righteous letter to the newspaper. It was published. I also received a call from the cartoonist suggesting I was too sensitive. A few days later, one of the workers from Coles took me aside and thanked me for sticking up for them. She then added, "Mind you, we did have a bloke that looked like that working here." But he moved to Margaret River. While coming to grips with my electorate, I also had the role of whip. There was a steep learning curve since I was new to Parliament, and the then Leader of the House, the Honourable John Kabelke, had the tendency of moving suspensions of standing orders at short notice. I would immediately have to summon members into the chamber. Technology was not so advanced, so discreet text messages were not possible. Rather, the receptionists would be asked to page recalcitrant members over the loudspeaker. If I had $1 for every time I heard the loudspeaker blare, "Paging John Quigley, please return to the chamber." I stress members that in those days, numbers were considerably tighter than they are now, and missing a division was a big deal. That said, I still remain guilty for being overly strict, uncompromising and short on pastoral care. By the way, it was only when I ceased being whip that I discovered the locations of John Quigley's hiding places around the building. In my second term, I became Parliamentary Secretary to Premier Gallop. That was a rare honour. He is a person of great integrity and strongly held beliefs consistent with Labor values. WA had issues with the allocation of GST, and we began to work with Treasury to prosecute the findings of the report of Professor Ross Garner and Dr Vince Fitzgerald, Review of the Commonwealth State Funding, Final Report 2002, which found that GST distribution needed fundamental change. At one stage, Western Australia's proportion fell as low as 30%. This was the beginning of a concerted campaign over more than a decade for a better deal for this state. Members, I also had the all too short opportunity in Cabinet. Initially, I held the portfolios of disability services and multicultural interests, seniors, volunteers and ageing, and assisting on federal-state relations. The disability portfolio was life-affirming. I saw ordinary Western Australians doing extraordinary things and making sacrifices to care for their loved ones. Members, this was before the introduction of NDIS. The demand for supported accommodation far outweighed supply. Periodically, I would have to take to Cabinet stories of elderly, often infirm or sick parents having missed out on a placement for their then adult child. It was heartbreaking. As was the plight of young people with acquired brain injury from a variety of causes, including road trauma, who were warehoused in nursing homes due to lack of more appropriate alternatives. That was something we managed with campaigners to get on the COAG agenda and secure Commonwealth funding. I thank Dr Ruth Sheen for her sage advice during this time. In those days, disability services were not even on the radar. So it's appropriate this time that I acknowledge the Honourable Bill Shorten MP for his important contribution by raising awareness, creating the NDIS and putting this important issue firmly on the political agenda. I recall my first budget breakfast as a member of Cabinet. The crowded function room of pinstriped 30-something finance types listened as Treasurer Eric Ripper outlined the key elements of the budget. I notice he's up there today, and the Honourable Lil Ravlich, so I acknowledge their presence. In his generous way, the Treasurer kindly mentioned a minor win that I had when we restored a program which had been axed by the court government. In the midst of all these sexy major announcements, he expressed delight that Margaret Quirk had restored the incontinence pad subsidy. Not quite riveting for the audience, but I remember this generous gesture. Alas, all too short a time later, I lost disability services and gained corrective services. Overcrowding, a massive overrepresentation of First Nation prisoners, high rates of recidivism, sketchy or non-existent program delivery, systemic racism and departmental resistance to change were all challenges which had to be met. Nevertheless, I considered I had at last found my vocation, but as it turned out, I had little time to make a lasting impact. One event has had an enduring influence on me, and that was the death by heat stroke of Warburton elder Mr Ward in the back of a private prison van in blazing heat travelling from Laverton to Kalgoorlie. The coroner found that the air conditioner in the back of the van was not working and adequate checks were not carried out by the transport staff. There were other lapses in judgment by police and the local JP. Inexcusable, it should never have happened and was avoidable. After the death, a range of remedial measures were taken, but public outrage was virtually non-existent. That saddened me. Surely there should have been calls for my resignation, an outcry, nothing. For that reason, I agreed to be interviewed on Four Corners. The interviewer, the now late Liz Jackson, won a Walkley Award for the program. I was reduced to tears on national television. And sometimes later, I also agreed to another with the unctuous John Pilger in a program called Utopia. Again, hardly a murmur. I had several questions on notice asked of me by an independent member, and a legislative committee held an inquiry at which I was not called to give evidence. On the other hand, one of the success stories in corrective services was the Boronia Pre-Release Centre for Women. It was designed for those about to transition back into the community and to equip them with the basic life and work skills. At a time of low unemployment, I would regularly be approached as Minister for Small Business about staff and skill shortages. The then head of the SBDC, Stephen Moyer, suggested we invite a number of employers to an event at Boronia to showcase the skills of the women, particularly in hospitality and horticulture. It was a huge success. The prospective employers were pleasantly surprised by those they met, and relationships developed between them and the centre, leading to a regular conduit of jobs on release. The feedback was invariably positive. It is trite, but we all know that employment upon release is a key factor in reducing recidivism. It is no wonder that Boronia has garnered many awards and international study groups frequently visit. I also acknowledge the marvellous work of the then Superintendent Jane Allen. Next stop, opposition. That was bleak, especially in the northern suburbs. With Janine Freeman, the member for Nollamara, we were the Labor outpost, with most state and federal seats being held by the Liberal Party. We had to show the flag at numerous events. They were lonely gigs. These days, there is a great Labor team in neighbouring seats, the members for Joondalup, Hillary's, Wanneroo, Kingsley and Mirrabooka, and the federal members for Pearce and Cowan. I've often remarked, Madam Speaker, that my personality is perhaps better suited to throwing grenades than ducking. I held roles in opposition, including shadow police, road safety, seniors and multicultural interest. And I'm proud of my achievements during this time. I was assisted by friends in the union movement, Graham Gear, President of the United Firefighters Union, and Michael Dean at the WA Police Union. They were always accessible and briefed me on pressing and technical issues. They were not motivated by venal politics, but solely by serving the best interests of their members, and I thank them. I introduced a private members bill which amended workers' compensation laws to incorporate a presumption that certain listed cancers were contracted by firefighters in the course of their job. This eliminated the legal hurdle of identifying which specific incident was the cause of cancer. Overseas jurisdictions like Canada had similar laws, and they were also enforced under Commonwealth law for airport firefighters. Alas, the Barnett government rejected the bill for no good reason. A bill in almost identical terms was introduced by the Barnett government a year later. Since that time, the categories of cancer has been expanded. At the risk of sounding immodest, an editorial headed WA Liberals never worked hard enough in the Western Australian was written after the 2021 election. I will refer to it because I think it remains topical. Then there's government backbenchers like Margaret Quirk. When she was in opposition, she never let a day go by without trying to hold the Barnett government to account. Quirk up aside, you would be hard-pressed to find a single state Liberal MP over the last 4 years with 1/3 of the tenacity of someone like Quirk. They say the harder you work, the luckier you get. The WA Liberal Party just found out the hard way that the saying goes both ways. WA is now, for all intents and purposes, a one-party state. Thankfully, our readers can be assured that the Western Australian will work hard. Our role as the fourth estate has never been more important, and it's a role we will always take seriously. I have to say, that's a fine piece of writing. And it's no wonder that the editor, Anthony DeCelli, has moved on to greater things. Members, I've served on a number of parliamentary committees. This is vital work, done without much scrutiny, in a bipartisan manner, and with the backing of conscientious and professional research staff. I am most proud of several inquiries, those on the challenges for governments of an ageing population, affordable housing needs, post-traumatic stress for first responders, and a review of the 25th anniversary of Aboriginal deaths in custody to inquire what recommendations were still to be implemented. In the latter inquiry in 2013, we recommended the need for a custody notification service to family. Alas, that recommendation was not actioned promptly, which may have prevented the awful death of Miss Dew in the lockup at Port Hedland in 2014. I congratulate the Labor government and Attorney General Quigley in particular for finally ensuring the service became operational. I was also chair of the Oversight Committee of the CCC last term. Of particular note was our extensive report on the risks of corruption and procurement. I have maintained my interest and some level of expertise in anti-corruption processes and have had the opportunity to speak at conferences and to train parliamentarians from overseas and here. I intend to continue that work in retirement. With redistributions progressively moving me north, by 2013 I'd inherited Lansdale and lost some of the suburbs of the Girraween electorate. My margin was approximately 2.8%. This marked a change in demographics, fewer Homes West houses, fewer from Cal communities other than those from the Indian diaspora, which seem to be growing markedly. Instead, we're young families valuing education, wanting decent sporting facilities, and quite rightly wanting basic community infrastructure, which the local government had failed to provide. I enjoy the challenge of this changed environment, and I know that my successor, a Lansdale local, will serve the electorate with youthful enthusiasm, vitality and strategic know-how. I wish Daniel Pastorelli well in his endeavours and also a happy 37th birthday tomorrow. There are many people who deserve heartfelt thanks. Members know that what we achieve, we have not done alone. No, it's a team effort. I've been more fortunate than most to have had diligent, loyal, long-serving and long-suffering electorate staff, some of whom also worked in the ministerial office. Kylie Turner and Ingrid Teller-Stoglu kept it real and ensured within reason that I did likewise. They were compassionate, friendly and highly competent face of Team Quirk in the early days when I was still finding my feet. Marvellous Ingrid retired in 2021 and is fondly and often remembered. Kylie was a fierce campaigner, and especially during the Internecine Challenge in 2005 election, and I cannot thank them enough. Others whose presence in the electorate office needs recognition were Tony Minchin, Greg Roberts, Anthony Harris, Steve McDougall and Bartong Pham, of course, who then went on to be the first and only person of Vietnamese heritage to become a member of the Legislative Council, before unfortunately suffering health challenges. And more recently, James Rowe, coincidentally now the Deputy Mayor of Wanneroo, is a conscientious and highly intelligent addition to the office. Wise beyond his years. Finally, the remarkable, indefatigable Michelle Sweet, who has been an electorate officer for me for 19 years. I repeat, 19 years. I cannot overstate my good fortune to have worked with Michelle. It has truly been a highlight. And of course, the whole family gets conscripted from time to time into volunteering. I thank husband Martin, Sarah, Jessica, Ben and Aaron. Needless to say, all staff were imbued with good, solid Labor values and approached their roles with professionalism, good humour and the right amount of scepticism. Then the ministerial office staff. It was a short ride but action-packed. Chief of Staff Simon Ward was an excellent at dissecting a budget paper and fiercely loyal. He could hose me down metaphorically when some instance of rank incompetence or maladministration pushed my buttons. Ryan Taff, John Lamb, Simone Rodwell, Peter Neller, Jackie Finlayson, Kylie Harrington and media advisors John Duffy, Inga Budafich and David Harris were enthusiastic and anxious to make a positive difference. And of course, Madam Speaker, family are important. As a childless spinster without a cat, I was in constant admiration of my colleagues with partners and young children. In the early days, sitting hours were less family friendly. It was really tough for them. I pay tribute to all those family members who've had to bear more than their fair share of responsibility while constituency and parliamentary commitments took priority. In my case, I enjoyed the unconditional support from my family, brother Chris, sister-in-law Sherry, and I pride myself on being a cool aunt to Eleanor, Charles, Tom, Jack and Anna. And the next generation, Amelia, Chloe, Isabel, Gus, Maddie and Lachlan. And I'm also a somewhat delinquent godmother to Candice, Liam, who also has a birthday tomorrow, and Elliot. My marvellous parents, Jim and Helen Quirk, now deceased, instilled in me a strong sense of faith and social justice, the merits of public service and an unflagging work ethic, and for ensuring that I valued the opportunities which they so generously gave me. Not least of these was a high regard for the enrichment which education can provide. And I remember fondly close colleagues that have died, John D'Orazio, Joe Radicic and John Kabelki. And the last group of individuals I need to acknowledge are friends and colleagues who have been present along the roller coaster ride, and I'm sorry if I've forgotten anyone. Overseas, we have former member for Perth, John Hyde, interstate are my friends Felicity James, Simone Wood and the Honourable Michael Atkinson, and Craig Shannon, who along with Bill Johnson I've known since my Canberra days. Craig became my offside at the last election in selflessly door-knocking in searing heat, a task he did not relish. But he kept the morale high with his witty and acerbic observations. Other fellow travellers whose support I have appreciated in no particular order are Emmy and Sylvia Barzotto, Bill Ledbetter and Margot Norman, Marino Salinas, councillors Brett Treby, Dom Zappa and Nat Herridge, Jai Wilson and Mary Monkhouse, union leaders Ben Harris, Smokey Dawson, Brad Gandy and Mick Buchan. Also, of course, branch members who over the years supported me and willingly and cheerfully staffed polling booths. Colleagues are too numerous to mention, but Kate Doust and Bill Johnson have been long-term friends. And, of course, the class of 2001, diminishing by the day, and my Progressive Labor faction allies. You know who you are. Lastly, my dear pal, Speaker Michelle Roberts. I could say we're partners in crime, but that might seem to be guilt by association. She's been an excellent friend, gave wise counsel, and at times had the unpleasant job of breaking bad news with grace and empathy. And I think, members, that you'd all agree under the Speaker's stewardship, there have been many positive changes to Parliament, physically, administratively and procedurally. It is quite a record that no one has been ejected in almost 4 years. I say yet, there's a couple of days to go. I wish Premier Quirk and his team a successful result in 2025. I've known the Premier for many years and I describe him as a good egg. He's a patient and kind listener and a quiet achiever. All have worked hard over the term and deserve the continued trust of the Western Australian community. In the interest of posterity, members, and mindful that many of the younger members will have the opportunity to give a contribution at my condolence motion, I must correct the record. I looked up my entry in Wikipedia. It cuts out at 2013. Disappointed to think I could have been luxuriating on a banana lounge somewhere exotic for the past 10 years. However, the ChatGPT entry starts well by knocking 2 years off my age, but then it's disturbing. It reads in part, Margaret Quirk was born in Western Australia. Wrong. Margaret Quirk pursued her education at the University of Western Australia, where she earned a Bachelor of Arts, later completing a diploma in education. Wrong. Before entering politics, Margaret had a diverse career. She worked as a teacher and principal in various educational settings, gaining valuable insights into challenges faced by students and educators. Wrong. Her election marked the beginning of a significant political career characterised by advocacy for education, social justice and community welfare. Partly wrong. Throughout her time in the Assembly, she had several important positions, including, wait for it, Minister for Education. Minister for Education! In this role, she spearheaded initiatives aimed at improving educational outcomes, which I think goes to the Honourable Liliana Ravlich, which is upstairs. Wrong. As a member of the Labor Party, Margaret has been a strong advocate for mental health services, championing reforms that increased funding and resources to support individuals and families in need. Good idea, but wrong. Her focus on mental health has made a lasting impact on the community, fostering greater awareness and understanding of these critical issues. More accurately, I was only obsessed with my own mental health. Her approachable demeanour and willingness... Shouldn't be that funny.
I'm not laughing.
Her approachable demeanour and willingness to listen have endeared her to many, making her a respected figure in her community. Now that's just getting silly. Finally, people have taken to ask me what I intend to do in retirement. I'm not sure. Travel is definitely on the cards. I hope to continue to contribute to our community and use my diverse set of skills in some helpful way. I am contemplating taking up pickleball. In short, the world is my oyster. I rather like the way that President Barack Obama put it when asked, "Do you have a bucket list?" And he replied, "Well, I have something that rhymes with bucket." Inexcusable. Where's the deputy?